Something happened with space recording again. So currently there are the town of Montgomery, Wallkill, Warwick, Monroe, Cornwall, and Goshen have CACs or some version of it. Village of Goshen, City of Newburgh, Town of Blooming Grove, Town of Highlands, and Village of Tuxedo Park. So there's less than a dozen, and I'm hoping you might be interested, the crowd, in helping us grow that number. What do they do? Well, it's usually a group, an advisory group of 3 to 9 members, and it advises a municipal board for the development, management, and protection of its natural resources. This is under New York State Article 12F GML 239. And it is formed via a resolution, an ordinance, or a local law of a municipality's legislative body. It advises municipal and planning boards about this protection and management of open space, natural areas, and other environmental issues. And it meets once or twice a month or only as needed. But like a bad infomercial, I have to say, but wait, there's more. Wrong spot. Go back this way. My son went too far. I apologize. This way. Oh, for the love of God. Yep, here we go. We're on the right one again. So the extra perks of having a climate Conservation Advisory Council, there's a lot of acronyms, I apologize. Conservation Advisory Council, CACs, can be an information source on the environment and climate change concerns. It also conducts surveys and studies and inventories of natural and physical features, including open space and wetlands, but also can do traffic counts and park acreage and tree inventories. CACs can also increase citizens' understanding of the environmental resources through education and outreach. They can advise and cooperate and work with other official municipal agencies. We're seeing this in Monroe right now with DPW, possibly working with composting. CACs could also prepare an annual report. So suffice it to say, it could be as much or as little as the CAC members can afford to do. So going back, one more backwards, you don't actually have to go backwards. The town of Montgomery does everything. They participate in saving Benedict Farm Park. That was a big one. They have participated in Solarize and Energize campaigns. They sell rain barrels. Right now they're working with the Heat Smart campaign that the county is sponsoring. The town of Wallkill many years ago participated in a big tree contest, which it sounds so silly at face value. However, in hindsight, I realized it was so incredibly smart because they developed a tree inventory, usually on private lands, and that's something that's priceless. A tree inventory, a tree management plan is something that the CAC can do. The town of Monroe certainly just did a tree management plan. The town of Monroe also, the picture you see on your screen right now is a gentleman who's participating in stream monitoring. That's what one of their CACs have done years ago. Town of Goshen was popular with trees for tribs plantings. City of Newburgh combined their waterfront task force and with their Shade Tree Commission and made one big CAC, which now oversees the 3 components. And the town of Highlands has an energy advisory committee, and they're big right now into community choice aggregation. The town of Blooming Grove started because of the hurricane flooding from 9 years ago now, and they worked most recently with the town of Cornwall and the town of Blooming Grove on developing a natural resource inventory, which is what, bringing this all back to you, how this is coming together, because something like that helps you become a preservation committee to prepare a preservation plan for the Community Preservation Act. But before we go there, folks, I just would like to give a little bit more shout out to a Climate Smart Community, which is a New York State designated program. And the county participated in a pilot program in 2013 that basically developed this program along with a few others, communities dotted around the state. The Climate Smart Community Program uses points and Olympic color designation to incentivize municipalities to reduce their greenhouse emissions and adapt to a changing climate, and then work towards becoming environmentally sustainable. It all starts with adopting a simple pledge like the one you see here. It's simple enough, but then of course you need a sustainability task force to execute some of these items that you see above you. And they can elect to do all of these, some of the things that the Climate Smart Community Task Force, CSC, can participate is in assessing existing land use plans, such as your comp plan, your master plan, your open space plan. And this is a good thing to do in conjunction with a preservation plan, which is part of the Community Preservation Act that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of overlays there. So if communities are ramping up to do that, comp plans, master plan rewrites, it would be ideal to get the preservation plan involved in that. Another thing they could do is identify the local resources that are vulnerable to climate change. And again, this was seen after the hurricanes 9 years ago. That's what motivated the town of Blooming Grove to get a committee together and to start their CAC. They gather information on energy use in municipal operations. One way is benchmarking, and the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, has a fantastic program where it allows this to be monitored easily. Another way is to identify ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from local government operations and services, and that's called a greenhouse gas inventory, and to develop a local action plan to implement these emission reductions. And that's called a climate action plan. Now, these are two things that the county has applied for funding, and we're hoping to secure a grant that we can do this countywide, as well as help interested municipalities. So please let me know if you're interested. Another thing, we're almost at the bottom, gather information on planned projects to integrate energy conservation and waste reduction practices. An example of this would be to put electric conduit under parking lots so that one day when you are ready to have electric vehicle charging stations, you will have that there. It costs a lot of money, so if you are thinking about redoing your parking lots, or even in new proposed plans, you always put the conduits under the ground first, so that will save your money down the line. EV charging stations are coming down in price, and there's lots of state grant funding and incentives to get on board. So the biggest expense would be already paid for. Something else is incorporating LEED architecture or low impact design or green building into many of these proposals. You could gather information on available funding sources. There used to be grants pre-COVID, and hopefully one day there will be more. And research similar initiatives in other localities. Again, there's lots of creative things going on, and even locally, as I referenced before, Monroe is in the very, very early discussion stages of voluntarily collecting compost. They did their tree management plan. So there's creative communities going on, doing wonderful things locally and afar. And it just needs research. It needs to be brought to your town board, and then your town board can say, hey, we want to get involved in that, or let's research it further. The last bullet I have here is educate residents and businesses. And again, this is so important. Counties doing this with composting, but individual municipalities can start doing this because you can compost easily. It just takes a little bit of planning. Private buildings can benchmark, takes some education. And these are examples of how, of what the Climate Smart community can do. Now, I suspect some of you see where this is going. One more slide, and I'm on my last slide, folks. All you need is one group of individuals that can act and serve in 3 different capacities. One omission I failed to mention was that being part of a Climate Smart community, you get grant bonus points from the state. The state is moving any climate smart community, designated community, a community that took that pledge, to the top of all grant piles. So you will get extra points by adopting the pledge via a resolution, and therefore starting a climate smart community task force. And that task force can start executing the aforementioned items we talked about. And that same task force could act as your conservation advisory council and can examine the proposed building development proposals in front of your town. And that same body can also act as a community preservation planning committee. Now, I'm going to hand the mic over to the new Commissioner of Planning, Alan Sorensen, and he's going to explain the preservation plan. Thank you very much. I'm muting. I'm doing it here. Alan, give me 1 minute. Oh, why is it not unmuting him? Okay, so I have to go back to participants. Give me a moment, Alan. That's me. Wrong one more. Unmute. Coming. Unmute, Alan.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Alan. Thank you. We could hear you now.
Okay, thank you for, very much for that overview. I want to welcome everyone this evening. I see that we now have 47 participants. I think that's wonderful for this webinar. I am going to speak ever so briefly on community preservation plans, because our next speaker, Mike Sweeten, really has spearheaded this type of planning work in Orange County, and I want to give him ample time to speak to what's happened in Warwick. The Community Preservation Fund is under general municipal law with state authorizations. Communities are able to adopt a community preservation fund, which allows for the imposition of a transfer real estate tax to generate revenues for to implement your community preservation plans. Orange County unanimously passed a resolution about a year ago in support of becoming part of the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Fund. But I guess the point I wanted to get across this evening is for those communities that are interested in developing, joining and taking advantage of a community preservation fund, you also need to develop a community preservation plan. And so that's what I wanted to speak to just ever so briefly. I was involved working with the town of Chester in the development of its community preservation plan. But that plan was really an outgrowth of its 2015 comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan recommended priorities in terms of open space preservation, farmland preservation, and the town had a history of proactively participating in open space preservation. Back in 2004, the community passed, there was a referendum that passed to acquire the 91-acre Knapp's View parcel, which is just south of where the town hall is on Kings Highway. And that is a town-owned property. And then a few years back, they also acquired the theater in Sugarloaf. The community preservation plan is intended to provide a foundation and the framework for establishing a community preservation fund, which enables the town to supplement its PDR, purchase and development right efforts, and to proactively protect valuable open space and farmland through the purchase of such lands and or conservation easements thereon. I would just emphasize to our viewers that if your community is interested in developing a community preservation plan, there are resources that we can provide at the planning department to help you get on that path of developing a community preservation plan. The plan would speak not only to the establishment of a community preservation fund, but also you would look at other tools, land use planning tools to preserve open space. It could include recommendations for amending your zoning or subdivision regulations. In addition to the purchase of development rights, a community might participate in a transfer of development rights program, maybe conservation easements or incentive zoning. So there are a number of tools that a community can put in place, and a community preservation plan really should reflect the unique values of every municipality. So if for our viewers that are listening this evening, we have a great panel of speakers that are lined up, but the message I guess that I would want to send out is, if your community is interested, please contact Orange County Planning. We're there to help. We can guide you, give you some good examples, help guide you through the process. And I think our next speaker, Mike Sweeten, is the experience that they've had in Warwick, I think is just a wonderful program that they've developed there. So I don't want to take away from his time. The work that they've done in Warwick is really a model that each of us can learn from. So with that, Kate, if you'll unmute Mike, I will turn it over to Mike Sweeten.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you, Alan and Kate, first for putting this on. I think it's a great venue to learn and understand the path that you're going to have to take to do this. You know, there's basically 4 ways you can preserve land in your town, right? You can zone it, you can upzone, and I think at one point in Warwick's path, somebody talked about 25 acres per unit to preserve farms. You can imagine how well that went over. You can do incentive zoning, clustering. You can preserve a lot of good land by clustering, which makes a lot of sense. You can do it through taxation. The town of Warwick combined with Goshen, Montgomery, and another one, maybe way beyond at one point in this path, and tried to get an Orange County transfer tax bill at one point, and that fizzled. And then I think Montgomery just did it through general taxation. So, so that's a method you could do. Bonding is another one, and it brings us to Warwick's first effort. Back in the early 90s, we had an effort called Community 2000, which was a look ahead. Our comprehensive plan pretty strongly indicated that our economy was based on farming and we should do what we could to preserve farming. It was disappearing fairly rapidly in the 80s and 90s. And a couple of people emerged out of that. Seymour Gordon, Leonard DeBuck was a councilman, and they researched and understood the concept of purchase of development rights. So purchase of development rights is where you go to the landowner, you get an evaluation of the land, the market value, and then you get an evaluation of the developable value of the land, and then a raw land value. And what you purchase is the development value. So the landowner still owns the land, can sell the land, can farm the land, can leave it fallow, just can't put houses on it. And that's the path the town took. The state was, I believe, and the feds were kind of getting into the program. It was a 75% amount, 25% was expected to either, you had to come up with it from your municipality, or the one Warwick was to say, landowner, you should donate it and you'll get a tax advantage to that. But again, you can imagine a farmer who's been farming his land for 50 years is not much interested in a donation of 25% of its value. But that is the way the program worked. There was one notable success, which is the Tunis Sweetman farm, which Tunis farms today. It was not, he didn't own a farm, he wanted to own a farm, and he approached landowners, and they cobbled together, I think, county funding, federal funding, and maybe some state funding, no town funding at the time, and that became the first farm in Warwick. But again, you can imagine farmers really were reluctant, but the community valued it, went to the voters in a bond referendum, and it passed. So they voted, the taxpayers of Warwick voted to impose upon themselves a bond of $9.5 million to preserve farmland. The program, it passed about 55-44. It was, somewhat controversial, but it passed. And again, this 75-25 split thing created some issues with the farmers. Who were the large landowners were generally farmers in Orange County, right? A lot of them don't have 401ks, they have their land. And that's their investment in their future. And they just didn't really like that at all. Warwick also was going through rezoning at the time, and there was an upzoning effort underway. So the program didn't really take off. You can go to the next slide. I got elected, 3 board members decided not to run in 2001. Myself, Annie Rabbit, and Mickey Schuback, a farmer, ran and were elected to the board. And we understood the importance of what the concept was. And at that point, I did convince the board and was supported wholeheartedly that we would pay 100% of the development rights value. It was not fair to the landowner to say, contribute it, okay? And that really sort of broke the logjam, I would say. We also said we will reimburse all closing costs upon closing. So we would pay for your title, your survey, and the appraisal if you closed, if you got to closing. The town attorney's costs were absorbed by the town. And we did also offer some options. So we would pay you the full value in a lump sum at closing for your development rights. Or we would also issue you a 20-year municipal bond, which is free from federal and state tax. You can do that. That bond is saleable, so the landowner could sell it. But it does provide them with principal and interest payments over time. That works for some, doesn't work for others, but it is an option. Next slide, please. We also, because we had $9.5 million authorization, we were able to entice other interested parties. So Scenic Hudson was a partner at one point. Open Space Institute was a partner at one point. The Orange County Land Trust at one point. Orange County government was a partner when they had an active farmland preservation grant program. The federal government, obviously, the NRCS program, which is a 50% match, and the Department of Ag and Markets in New York, which is a 75-25 program still. So it's an important point to make. If you have funds, you attract other funds, and you'll see why that's important as we go on with this. So that is critical. You could apply to the Ag and Markets program today, and you could be successful in your community to get a grant from them, but you have to come up with the match. Somebody has to come up with the match. And that's where a lot of communities stumble, because they just can't do it, especially in the environment municipalities are under today. Next slide, please. So again, that bond referendum preserved 2,300 acres of prime farmland at a cost of $16.5 million. 7.1 million of it came from the PDR bond fund, I'm sorry. And again, the other portion of that came from other entities, the ones that I just mentioned. So once we had committed to 100%, once we showed we had the money, once we showed that you could close relatively quickly within a year, what we were competing against was a developer. And the developer would ride down a farm road and he would say, I want to buy your land and I want to pay you $5 million for your land. And right away, I mean, if I'm a farmer and I'm milking twice a day and I'm up to my eyeballs in mud, I'm thinking pretty good deal, right? So a lot of them wanted to do that. But the caveat to that is the developer doesn't give you $5 million. He says, okay, here's $100,000 or $50,000. And when we get approvals, we'll pay you the balance. Well, sometimes the approval process for residential development, especially at that time, was taking several years in most municipalities because there's a lot of issues, seeker issues, infrastructure issues, resource issues. So farmers are pretty smart, and pretty soon, once we landed a couple of really prominent farms in Warwick, they understood that, hey, our process was pretty good. They got value, they got their value, and they still had their land to do what they wanted with it. I will tell you that all of the farms purchased in the PDR program continue to be farmed today in the town of Warwick. Not necessarily by the same farmer and not necessarily in the same way, but they are all still farming. The other important thing to remind your residents of is they pay tax now on their farm. They continue to pay the same tax on their farm after the development rights are stripped off. So it doesn't affect the taxes they're paying. And that's sometimes a confusing point. We can move on, and I'll just note that in 2003, so really a year and a half or so after we really got the program cooking, we were running out of money. We had more farms that wanted to be in the program than we had money in the bond. So we knew that. Next slide. There we go. Whoop. We skipped one. There we go. So again, all the farms are working farms. They're paying taxes. They're contributing to the economy. Our community benefits in a lot of ways. We get open space, which everybody loves. We preserved a lot of watershed resources, which is so important today. And we also have preserved habitat for wildlife. And at that point in the program, real estate values in Warwick were 45% higher than anywhere else in Orange County. Now, why is that important? Just keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward, because one of the arguments that is put out by special interests who oppose a transfer tax is that it hinders land values. It suppresses them, and it hinders the sale of real estate in your town. So just keep that in mind. All right, next slide, please. So we began to look around. What do we do? What are other options? And we looked and discovered down on the east end of Long Island, the 5 towns, pretty ritzy areas, right? But they had approached the state and got authorization to impose a real estate transfer tax. They chose 2% because of land values down there. They felt they needed more money. And it passed. Again, it was pretty controversial down there. They had a pretty wicked battle from the real estate industry, pretty brutal campaign, but they did succeed. And several years after it was enacted, they went to extend it, went back to the legislature to extend it, and didn't have nearly the controversy or opposition in doing that. A 6th town on Long Island tried it, Brookhaven, I believe, and it did fail in Brookhaven. So these things are a campaign and an effort, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. So when our effort with the other 4 towns in Orange County petered out, we decided to go alone. And our position we took was, we're going to make the bill the same exact bill as Long Island, okay? And then we're going to ask our legislators and our governor, if you won't support ours, how could you have supported one already and passed it and signed it, right? So that was going to be our argument if we couldn't succeed. Well, it took us 4 years. Every year we would go to Albany and we put the home rule request in, and we'd get bounced back and forth between the Assembly and the Senate. And one would say, oh, you know, you're okay in the Senate, but you got a problem in the Assembly. We'd go to the Assembly and they'd say, well, you're okay here, but you'll have a problem in the Senate. And that's what Albany does when they don't really want to deal with anything. They can put them in committees and not ever get them out. So we persevered because, again, we knew what it was doing for our community already with our own bond. And we were lucky in that Annie Rabbit, who was on my town board, my deputy supervisor, successfully ran and became our assembly person. And my senator at the time was Senator Tom Morahan. I don't know if anybody remembers Tom Morahan. Great guy, a little crusty, hated being labeled as somebody who imposed or voted for more taxes. So he was not a real fan. And I would have great conversations with him over those 4 years. And finally, what I believe convinced them was Annie Rabbit and myself telling him that, Senator, this is not you imposing this tax. And this is critical for you as you approach your legislative people. You're only asking for authorization to ask your voters in your town to vote in favor of this. So if anybody believes in democracy, this to me is the epitome of democracy. You are asking your voters, if they don't approve it, they don't approve it. If they do, they do. So that convinced Senator Morahan. He moved it through the Senate and Governor Pataki signed it into law. But that's only the first step. So you are required, once you get authorization from the state and the governor signs your bill, to hold a referendum. And that's where the community preservation plan is really critical. Alan spelled that out for you. You do have to list all the properties in your community that you believe you need to protect and why you need to protect them. So what we did was we took a map of the town of Warwick, we looked at parcels that were undeveloped, and then we looked at what makes those properties valuable. They were a farm, they had critical wetlands on them, they had critical environmental features on them, they were part of a greenbelt area, all of those things. So we took these parcels, we put them all and put them into different categories, and we listed them by section, block, and lot in our plan. And you can see that it is on our website at townofwarwick.org, and explained each of the categories and what was important about them. Now, once you have that plan and you adopt that plan after a public hearing, that plan, if you're successful in your referendum, becomes the plan that you have to then implement with your transfer tax. If a property is not in that plan, you cannot use the fund to acquire the development rights on it. You can add, after I believe my legislation was 3 years, you can add properties to it, but they have to be in the plan to be eligible for the funding. So again, it's critical to look at your community, what parcels you really need to preserve. Now again, just putting them in the plan doesn't commit the property owners to anything. You know, they're there and they're eligible for this if they want it as an option. So we did that with a group of volunteers. We did do some polling. We had some help from the Trust for Public Land, and I was very grateful for that, to understand where we stood on the day that the bill was signed into law and we announced it. Because generally what happens is your support erodes over time as the opposition sort of mounts to you. So it's good to know where you are and how much you can stand to lose to the point where you have your referendum, okay? And so I do encourage people, if you're gonna do this seriously, to perhaps consider something like that. We developed a case study for why this was important. We do know that Cornell's got lots of great information on how residential uses more in services than it pays in taxes, versus farmland or open space, which uses less services than it generates in tax revenue. So we wanted to make that case. Another very important piece of information we got from the Long Island effort was, do not deny that it's a tax, because your opposition they'll club you with that. Come out front and say, it is a tax, but here's what this tax does for your community. Here's the value of this tax. And I have dozens of people over this past 20 years, 15 years, say to me, I've run into them, say, you know, I've moved to Warwick and I paid that tax, and I understand why I paid that tax. I see what is here because of that tax. So don't run away from that. The other argument that I always use is, the residents of my town paid for 4 different schools, countless fire trucks, ambulances, buildings to house them, and we've created a really great community. So we're just asking you, we want you to come to our community because we value what you bring to it, but we're just asking you to help us maintain the quality that we have created here. And I think that's a powerful argument to make to people. I haven't had anybody sort of, just go crazy on me about it. We held a lot of forums. We did small ones, big ones, explaining it, because it takes explaining. Look, people are busy. They've got a lot going on, especially today. It does take some education. And fundraising, we did raise money because we did some materials for the campaign, which you will see. So again, the steps are, if you can get through the gauntlet of getting your home rule request through and passed and signed by our governor, the work begins. Create your community preservation plan, put together a strategy for winning a campaign. It's like any campaign, and execute your plan and get to the day when you have that vote. So we're going to see some PR materials, I think, Kate, if we can move those on. So here's some bumper stickers we did, and we did signs that went just along with it. We did a website. We explained on the back of the peel off of the bumper sticker, so when they got it, they at least had some talking points, right? Protect your water, hold down taxes, reduce the loss of farms, all those things, right? That we know are actually true. And you have an example of it. You can look at what's happened here and you can hold that out as an example. Next slide. So we did these postcard mailings, and we did some great, we had some local volunteer photographers that took some great shots. Now, if you're familiar with the town of Warwick, it's the largest town in Orange County geographically. I think population-wise now too, since Palm Tree split off. But so we have a very diverse area. We have 8,000 acres of black dirt. We have the rolling Central Valley, I call it. We have the Greenwood Lake mountainous sort of area on the western portion of the town. So we had a lot of different constituents to try to convince that this was of value to all of them. And we did it through this technique, which worked pretty well, preserving natural resources, preserving farms. Next slide. On the back of those cards, here were the little blurbs, right? Good little talking points. We also took each one of these and we ran we ran little ads in the local. We have 2 local papers, weeklies. So we put these little boxes of little snippets in there, and it helped. Keep going. Enlist realtors, because contrary to what the National Realtors Association and the State Realtors Association say, you can convince your local realtor that this makes some sense. I'll tell you, the first thing a realtor does in Warwick when it's going to sell a house is it takes the client past a preserved farm, and it says, hey, this farm's going to be, you're going to have cows on this farm forever. Now, I don't know whether we'll have cows on it, but you get the point, right? They see it as open space. This view isn't going to change ever. So it's a powerful message, and we did that. Keep going. So on the back of this flyer was comments, quotes from a local realtor. And, they go through why this was important to them. And they used it as a selling tool. So it can be done. It can be done. Next slide, please. Here's again, if we don't protect our town now, here's what's going to be lost. And we just took images that people see every day that they drive by. Do you want to see on this 100-acre farm, do you want to see 50 houses and a subdivision? I'll be honest, we have a subdivision that was the last one under our old zoning before we went to cluster zoning and incentive zoning, that you wouldn't build it today. And it's fine, but it's not what you would want to see. So this is one of the things. Control property taxes. Again, residential in the long run does not pay. I'm sorry. It just requires more services, more roads, more police, more recreation. It's not a winning strategy to keep building on all of your available land. It's just not. Next slide, please. But this is one I really love now because it's so appropriate for even today, right? We went to both the Democrat and the Republican committees locally in town and made our case and actually got them to support the effort. And we used it in a flyer. what's the backside? The backside of it, I think, has their names. So you can go to the next slide. So yeah, you see, so endorsed by these members of those two committees. And again, vote yes. Vote yes. That was the message. Protect what we love about Warwick. And that's what you take Warwick out and put your own community in there. That's what this is about. It's about balance. We still have residential development. It's mostly 95% all clustering at this point, which preserves up to 60% of the parcels. So that's kind of a home run too. You get 60% open space on a development. Pretty smart. Less roads, less infrastructure. Next slide, please. So here's the results. It passed in 2006, went into effect April 1st of 2007. It's generated to date $10.8 million. It's preserved over 4,500 acres, that includes the PDR bond, of working farms in the town of Warwick. It itself preserved 2,100 acres at a cost of $26 million, but the town's contribution to that was $8 million. So remember in the beginning, when you go to those partners, state of New York will pay 75% of the value. The federal government will pay 50% of the value of a farm. So you can stretch your money, and that's the key to having the money, is you're now competitive. We have won in every single round we have ever entered in either one of those programs. Again, our plan included not just working farms, although that was our focus and that was the bulk of the parcels, but Greenwood Lake, one of the largest lakes in the state, did not have any public access to it. It was all private beaches. So the town bought a marina on one of the most picturesque spots on Greenwood Lake. And we did it with the Community Preservation Fund. It is now the town beach and park in Greenwood Lake, and it's wildly popular, and it's a great asset. The village of Greenwood Lake also had no real village park or village green. So we acquired 16 acres in the very heart of the village of Greenwood Lake, and is now the Winstanley Park that has a walking trail, a ball field, a soccer field, nature trails that connect to some village property. And it's just a really, really sweet thing. We also preserved in our plan some historic structures. We purchased the Henry Seward homestead, which is in the village of Florida, by the way, hopefully to be renovated and restored at some point, in maybe before I leave this earth. And it's just an important historic structure, and we purchased it. And there's some renovations going on there, but it is a long haul, but it does preserve that. And we just think that's a really important thing too. Our recent acquisition was the former Kutz Camp, which is a 85-acre recreational area that was run for many years by URJ, United Reform Judaism. They did leadership training for youth. Their models changed. They were going to sell it. And we have purchased it for recreation for our town and our residents. We're excited about it, but we had the resources to be able to do that. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. So again, the Orange County Community Preservation Bill, what will this help you do, right? It's going to allow any town in Orange County to hold a referendum. So it's going to help you avoid the step of the struggle we went through for 4 or 5 years to become the 6th town in New York to get this authorization and fight the Albany battle. So I just think this will be a home run for you. And again, it's not imposing it. It's asking your voters whether they feel it's important for the survival and the continued preservation of your community. That Senate bill is stuck in local government in the Senate, so you need to lobby your senators to bring it out. I believe because it's a county bill, it does require all the senators of Orange County to vote it out of committee. So you do need to do that. I know that it was overwhelmingly endorsed by the legislature. Alan and Kate can speak to that, but if you looked at who the sponsors on their bill was when Alan put it up, it was bipartisan. It was not a Democrat or Republican issue, and it shouldn't be. Has been endorsed by 5 villages and 5 towns in Orange County. I am president of the Orange County Association of Supervisors and Mayors, and we did send a letter to our representatives with the names of those communities on it. Many of you are on this call, I believe, in support of it. So again, it's a home rule request. It does have to be carried. It just doesn't have to. You can't force it out of the committee. And I think we're represented by good senators and assembly people. I think if they understand the benefit to your community, I'm hoping that they can be convinced to move this forward. And I hope that Governor Cuomo will sign it. But you've just got to keep at it. You can't let up, and you've got to make the case for why it's so important to your community. And I think that's all I got, Kate.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was great. Andy Bicking from Scenic Hudson is becoming unmuted right now.
Great.
And we're getting him. Windows.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces here and some new ones as well. My name is Andy Bicking. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Scenic Hudson, and I'm joined here on the call today by Carly Fraccaroli, our Advocacy Associate, who's been working closely with me on Community Preservation Act and Community Preservation Fund issues throughout the Hudson Valley. I was asked to speak a little bit about some of the benefits of land protection and a little bit of the history of the Community Preservation Fund here in the Hudson Valley. But just by way of introduction, for those who don't know, Scenic Hudson is a regional nonprofit environmental organization. We preserve land and farms and create great parks that connect people to the inspirational power of the Hudson River. And we are also very involved with fighting the threats to the river and the natural resources that we consider to be the foundation of the region's prosperity. So while we're very committed to making our region a great place to live, work, and play, we also know that this vision is best achieved when local citizens and local governments are engaged in these kinds of issues. And that's really what drives a lot of our organization's interest in the Community Preservation Act and Community Preservation Funds locally, because we know that conservation projects will be most successful when there's local buy-in and support, and importantly, as Supervisor Sweeten you noted, when there's a matching fund arrangement between local government and state, federal, and potentially county sources and private funding if it is available. So next slide, please. So just a brief history of the Community Preservation Act. In the 1990s and 2000s, as you may have heard earlier, the concept was imported from Massachusetts and developed on the east end of Long Island with great success. And as you heard, Warwick passed their Community Preservation Act in 2007. At the same time, the town of Red Hook, New York did. And you heard some of the great accomplishments from Supervisor Sweeten. I know if Supervisor McKeon from Red Hook was here today, he would proudly tell you that using the CPF program, the town has protected almost 3/4 of the working farmland in the community. So it has really transformed the town of Red Hook in northern Dutchess County in important ways. It's not only allowed those beautiful scenic landscapes to continue to be there, it has preserved the kind of rural quality of life. It's preserved a lot of the economic assets that the community has, everything from large animal veterinarians to machine repair shops that are closely tied with the agricultural industry. So it's been really a huge, huge success. I've been working on Community Preservation Act policy for about 15 years or so. I advocated for both the Red Hook and Warwick measures with the state legislature. I've been working with Carly and others to organize regional trainings during this time to help local folks understand what this program can do for them, and was influential in lobbying for the passage of the Hudson Valley Community Preservation Act which enabled communities in Westchester and Putnam counties to have the authority to pursue funds. That law passed in 2007, right on the cusp of the Great Recession. And at the time, there were local governments that were moving to kind of advance a CPF locally, but with the onset of the recession, many of them pulled back. I can and have not yet used the program to advance their open space goals. However, they have been very active in open space preservation, but for a variety of reasons, different for every community, they have chosen to, bond using the existing financial resources within their community. Most recently, Carly and I worked to pass the Ulster County Community Preservation Act through the state legislature. We did really give a lot of energy and effort to the Orange County Community Preservation Fund, as well as some local measures that were in consideration. I know Colin Schmidt is here, Assembly member. Thank you for your leadership and being such a strong advocate for those bills. You've really proven yourself to be a great ally to conservation. And I don't know if Senator Jen Metzger's staff are on the call today, but they have also just been some of the strongest champions that you can ask in promoting the concept of CPF authority for Orange County communities. Unfortunately, the Orange Bill has not yet passed. We continue to work on it, and we are committed to do so. But in the meantime, we are excited that the town of New Paltz in Ulster County is taking advantage of the Ulster County measure and is moving forward with a referendum for this November. As you probably heard from Supervisor Sweeten and his story of Warwick, these are really tough measures to pass locally. And I just want to say that as a word to the wise, because many of us on the call, I'm sure, are true conservationists to heart, and we kind of think this is a no-brainer, and that's a wonderful thing. But it's important to recognize that some of the ways that we often think about community preservation funding is often different from other people in the community, especially when they start to hear negative messages from organized, paid outside lobby interests like the State Real Estate Realtors Association. So as you begin to think about this, I would just really encourage you to build into your design of your outreach and education. Think ahead about your campaign. Think about the steps you may need to do. Think about what you may need to do to raise funds to kind of pass a measure, because it will help you when that time comes and you encounter organized paid opposition. Next slide, please. So sorry, it looks like some of the images here are overlapping, but just to remind everyone, there's lots of reasons why we protect open space. And first and foremost, polling always tells us, when you ask people what they care about the environment, the thing that comes to mind first is drinking water, and that's a no-brainer. That's one of the reasons we protect land. It's not the only, but as you communicate locally, I strongly encourage you to put safeguarding drinking water supplies first and foremost in all your messaging. Nationwide, hands down, all of the time, drinking water polls the highest with people. Recreation is a big benefit. It's going to look different in different communities. That certainly is tied very closely with the tourism and economic development goals of communities in many respects. Fresh local food and farmland, one of the biggest industries here in the Hudson Valley next to farmland and next to tourism. And that's really important to think about that and be in communication with your agricultural community members and build support around this measure with them in mind. Open space also provides us great opportunities to protect habitat, mitigate floodwaters. We have increasingly severe storms in our region, and protecting open space over time is one of the most cost-effective things you can do to protect communities and other infrastructure against flooding. Protecting the beautiful scenic views that we all cherish, and often that overlaps with community preservation interests. I'll just note there that the Community Preservation Act legislation also allows local funding to go to historic preservation interests. So that's important to think about. It may be a very important constituency in your community. You may have very important historic preservation needs and interests. Just to give you a snapshot of what the town of New Paltz is hoping to do, in addition to an open space and a farmland protection and kind of a recreational asset and management plan that they're hoping to fund if their CPF passes in November, they also came up with a really innovative approach to support historic preservation, specifically covering the gap for homeowners who own historic homes, covering the gap of historic roofing shingles and roof treatments compared to what would be considered in the contemporary market if you were to go to Lowe's or Home Depot. So covering the difference between those costs is a really innovative approach that they are hoping to put into a place that will help, protect and preserve the quality of their historic district. So just something to think about. Finally, I think we all appreciate that, open space is directly associated with the lungs of the earth, a big public health benefit here for air quality, exercise, etc. And most important, at the end of the day, I know we all appreciate that protecting land is about our community identity and it's about our quality of life. Next slide. So as you look towards the future, I'll just close again by saying it's a lot of work to get these done. You have to get it passed through the state legislature. You have to create a plan. That plan has to be approved by the town board. You have to get ballot measure language proposed. You have to get the kind of tax approved and figure out what that right number is for your community and your local housing market. And then you need to go to the ballot box and get it done. But the benefit here is all that hard work, all that elbow grease, the blood and sweat you will put into this will pay off. Just think about Red Hook that now has nearly 3/4 of all of its farmland, active farmland in the community protected. And that's a gift that we can give to future generations that no one can take away and will be there for people to enjoy, cherish, and celebrate for many years into the future. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andy. That was fantastic. I appreciate that. Next, we have Assemblyman Colin Schmidt. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Kate, for working with me on this and so many other issues and for organizing this. And Andy, thank you for your presentation and for your partnership on this and many other issues that impact my district and our region. And I know Matt Decker and Jim, I'm not sure if they're still on, but they've been fantastic partners again on this and numerous other environmental land-based issues. And Supervisor Sweeten, always a sounding board on this issue and many other issues. And thank you for that presentation. I think that we've had a real holistic view of all angles of what we're dealing with here. And Mike, I think it was great that you went through and Andy a little bit, really the end where you're actually trying to get a public vote on the matter and get it passed. I think it's important that you gave that from your experience and show what the near the finish line will look like. We certainly have a little bit ways to go to there, but it's always good to be thinking a few steps ahead. I'm going to go over the Orange County Preservation Act from the state legislative point of view. I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. I know there's probably a lot of things going on in everybody's life, but we can go to the next slide if that works. So we've actually passed this bill, the Orange County Community Preservation Act, twice in the New York State Assembly this term, once in 19 and once in 20. This is a little overview of the bill. You can see this is the only known bill in modern history, and according to some reporters who reached out, may be the only time ever where the entire Orange County Assembly delegation, 5 members, Republicans and Democrats alike, all joined together and co-sponsored and passed the bill. It's usually there's one dissenter or somebody wasn't involved, or just a few, or is one party over another, but this bill has received unanimous bipartisan support from the New York State Assembly delegation. for Orange County. I think that's something that should be noted. I think it's great. It shows that this is, as been pointed out by Mike and others, this is a bipartisan issue. This is not a partisan issue, and it's something that we can get over the finish line. You want to go to the next slide? Just to show nearly unanimous passage both times in the state assembly, overwhelmingly popular. We were actually personally wrangled when we went from 5 no votes to 3 no votes. I was able to personally wrangle those 2 of those no votes. The second time, I was able to bring them over to the side of the light. And obviously, if and when we have to vote on it again, we're going to continue to push to make sure that maybe we can even wrangle 1 or 2 more of those remaining, and maybe even all 3 of them. We'll see. We'll keep working on that. Fred, yep, perfect. This is a little bit of the New York State legislative history, just to see, as Mike pointed out, we have passed this, but it is stalled in the state Senate. Unfortunately, the state Senate last year did pass, as Andy highlighted, the same exact bill for Ulster County. So the legislature has passed these before for counties. It already exists for Putnam County and Westchester County. So what this bill is actually just including additional counties into an existing law. So Putnam, Westchester counties has had it for, I forget the exact amount of years. I'm sure Andy knows the exact year, but they've had it for over a decade now, I believe. And it added Ulster County in last year, and we're seeking to add Orange County. And you can see that in the Senate, it did make it to the floor on the 3rd reading. It was on the calendar, and sadly, it got remanded all the way back to the lowest level in the Senate on June 9th for back all the way to the Senate Local Governments Committee. It's certainly a legislative setback in the Senate, and it's something that I certainly encourage, as has been mentioned numerous times here, to continue to encourage our state Senate delegation, as well as the Senate Local Governments Chair and the Senate Majority Leader, that this is something that Orange County wants in a nonpartisan fashion. This is just something that Orange County wants. I am very happy to inform everybody that we do have a commitment from the governor and from the governor's office to sign this legislation if it was passed. So he signed Ulster counties, and he will sign Orange County should the state Senate pass this bill. I stress the importance of this because, as it's been mentioned, this is a very difficult legislative process. This is the best way to approach it for Orange County. Give countywide authorization. The piecemeal fight, town by town, is not going to be successful. There are certain towns that will not be able to get this passed and signed into law due to various factors that are going on. But having a permanent countywide authorization that doesn't expire. Also, Mike can tell you that he's got a great bill, but guess what? It's going to come up for expiration in the next couple of years. So individual bills, 1, expire, and 2, based on different political realities, several towns will never be able to get it on an individual basis, but would be able to benefit under a county basis. And 1, you have communities that I represent, Blooming Grove, Chester, others, Monroe is another example. I don't represent Monroe, but they're another example who want it, who would like to take advantage of it. And we have other communities such as the town of Montgomery, village of Woodbury. I know several other, I guess you can move to the next slide, getting ahead. Here's some of the group of supporters that we have, different groups that have been supportive. If you want to go to the next slide as well. These are, again, some of the towns I named off. Some of these towns on here would like to have a PDR program put in place more quickly. Others, it's not even something that is necessarily on the immediate horizon for them. It's not something they might want to be doing this year or maybe even next year in the next 5 years. But they know they want this option that, hey, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, but we want this option. We want to be able to take advantage of it if and when it is appropriate for our community. The Orange County Legislature also unanimously requested this legislation, bipartisan fashion. So this is, again, you keep hearing bipartisan, unanimous, overwhelming support. That's the instance here. Mike named the 5 towns, 5 villages. We're listing out here. There's also several others that are in the process of supporting this. So if there's local government leaders, town or village leaders, I strongly encourage you to pass a local resolution in support of the Orange County Community Preservation Act. Whether this is something you immediately want to do or not, because even if it's 2-3 years down the road, to restart your clock then, as Mike told you, how difficult it is to get an individual bill through. If you have that authorization already, once we pass this, it'll be a blanket authorization indefinitely. It is so critical. And what I would encourage, and my office can certainly work with any community in my district, out of my district. We've helped several to explain to you how to pass this or to give you some draft language. I'm sure Supervisor Sweeten could do the same thing. Andy, whoever you're feeling comfortable, whichever person you might feel comfortable working with, but can provide you some of that draft language. And we encourage you to not only send it to your state assemblyman or woman, but and your senator, but to the entire delegation and the governor and the minority and majority leaders in both chambers. The more people that are notified of your support of this measure, the better. So I always say more is better, the more people that know, and especially since this is in the Assembly, a delegation-wide bill, letting every member know. And I usually try to notify my colleagues that, hey, we got another town in my district, or somebody notified me, hopefully they notified you. But I would strongly suggest, if you're going to support this, I'd love for you to support this, but please notify the entire delegation and the leadership of both parties and the governor's office. It's never too early to put it on everybody's radar, make sure everybody knows about it. I get to serve as ranking member of the local governments committee. My chairman, Fred Thiel, is a major supporter of this legislation. It is something that he advocated for. He's from Long Island. He's from the very, very east end of Long Island. It's something that he's advocated for several decades in the legislature. So we've been working very closely on this. We're going to continue, really continue to do that. I guess I'll just do a little bit extra on the legislative machinations that we are dealing with. So it has to pass both houses and then be signed by the governor. There are certainly interests, some that have been mentioned, some that have been not, that would not like to see this passed. But at the end of the day, there is overwhelming support. So we just have to get it over the last hurdle in the state Senate. We may or may not be going back to session this year. That's still to be determined. Technically, our session should be ended, but due to COVID, this year has certainly been turned upside down for all of us. So there's still a chance that we may be going back to session at some point between now and the end of December. So this means that this bill for this year is still alive. So I still think energy should be expended on the potential that the Senate goes back and can still pass this bill. But if not, we certainly will regroup, reintroduce this legislation in the next term. So that's what would have to happen next term. This would have to repass the Assembly and then be resent to the Senate if it doesn't pass this year. But if we're not successful in convincing the Senate to pass it this year, I will certainly reintroduce it with my colleagues. I know we've had those conversations with my colleagues in the Assembly, and we'll continue to advocate for it and continue to build support from more municipalities and more towns. I won't really harp on those other points that Andy and Mike mentioned, because they are experts at it and they did a fantastic job, except to say I am also a member of the Assembly Water Quality Task Force, and to highlight what Mike and Andy had mentioned of all the great uses, but particularly now as we have increased concerns of water quality, water quantity, water rehabilitative efforts in Orange County and the surrounding area, that it is one of the most critical pieces that we can do, especially as aquifer recharge areas are being decimated, in certain towns and regions of Orange County. As we're village of South Blooming Grove and parts of Blooming Grove, I know are dealing with really hitting dead water. So we're having communities that when they drill, they have to drill so deep that they hit dead water, unusable water. And again, Chester has similar concerns. I don't want to speak for other towns, but there are other towns who have expressed similar concerns to me. So there are so many aspects to it that, it's not just, yes, it's important to preserve the farms, but it goes beyond that into these maybe not as evident things to the general public, such as water, such as aquifer recharge areas, such as the long-term sustainability of the community at large to be able to provide necessary resources. So I certainly appreciate everybody, their passion and their interest. Happy to meet with anybody moving forward who needs specific help in their community to generate support for the Orange County Community Preservation Act. I want to thank my partners in government from both parties who have been actively supporting this. And I certainly want to thank the communities, the towns and villages, and the different outside groups who are pivotal in this. And certainly thank the Orange County Legislature for supporting this and requesting this in bipartisan fashion. And I would just stress, highlighting what Supervisor Sweeten said as well, there's nothing more pure and American than this. All it simply would give is a community the chance to let their residents decide if they want this program or not. They can say yes, they can say no. And my perspective, the general public deserves that right to choose what they would not like or what they would like in their own community at their time, given the standards that they would like. And we see, again, bipartisan support at every level. We just need to get it over that last hurdle in the upper chamber. And I like to think positive. I think positive thoughts will breed positive actions. And I think this is a step in the right direction where we will get there. It's not, can we get there? We will get there. We just, we can't take our foot off the gas pedal.
Thank you so much. Excellent.
Thank you.
And now we're going to turn to Carter Strickland from excuse me, I just lost my train of thought. Trust for Public Land, please.
Thank
Carter?
you.
Yep,
Yes,
we
thank
hear
you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Good evening, everyone. I feel like the closer in the Yankees game last night, but hopefully we'll all succeed together. Can you bring my slide up? Just as while my slide comes up, thank you. That's who I am. I'm the New York State Director. Trust for Public Land is a nonprofit that works to connect land and people, building parks and cities and acquiring land and working on conservation finance. Next slide, please. We have been in New York since '78, nationwide since '72. And one of my roles is to bring in the national experts on measures. We do have a conservation finance team. I know Andy and Supervisor Sweeten know them well, and other folks. They've been around for a long time, and this is their role to create the funding to do the things that we like to do for land conservation, parks restoration, and the like. And they have a process. So, you've heard about, how it works, to get it through and to comply with the specifics of the different community preservation acts in New York. Next slide, please. But first I want to tell you, it does work. Public funding, most of it is happening for land conservation at the local level. So the work you're doing is absolutely critical. You can see it's 46%. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. It does work. So you can see that, long term, this is nationwide, and we have a database called LandVote. You can just plug in www.landvote.org. Check out I think we track every single one since '88. But they've been very successful. The point of the bottom is it doesn't matter what the president is, it doesn't matter what party's in charge, it doesn't matter, we think things are dramatic now, and they certainly are. But 9/11, .com crash, 2008 crash, all these events happened, and local folks are voting for conservation measures. Next slide, please. During COVID, you might say, well, this is unique, this is special. Well, we're about that average. So, this is what we've, tracked since March 17th nationwide. Again, 9 out of 11, so 82%. So I think you're sending around these slides so we can just roll through to the next one, because I don't want to wait for folks to read it. And this is a plug for our database. You want to educate yourself, persuade folks. No, it can't be done. It can be done, and it is done. And we have the data to show it. You can sort this database by state, by local measures, by statewide measures. We're active in them all, or in many of them. Even the ones we're not active in, we collect the data on so you can see. Next slide, please. Our own track record is, about 82%, creating $80 billion. So yes, you can do it. And really it comes down to vote counting. Next one, please. You know, this is just what we've done in the last few elections. I'll run through it. You know, 54 measures in 21 states, and we were 46 for 54, you know, raising a few $1 billion. So it adds up. Next one, please. Similar stats, you know, 80% passage rate. So you can see, I mean, it's not 100%, but it's not, you know, 40% either. It's, you know, more often than not, local folks across the whole country have in common their love for open space and voting for money that they know what it's going to go for. And I think that's a big disconnect in general on taxes that is connected here. Next slide, please. You know, what we've worked on in New York, including, you know, way back in the day, Warwick, of course, you can see there, the transfer tax, 34 of 37, 92%. So New York in general, you know, the voters are more willing at a local level to vote for these measures. Next slide, please. So I'm going to roll through these. You can just kind of hit click, but, you know, there is a process here. What we start with is typically work with local partners. You know, you've got to have some folks on the ground. Scenic Hudson and Trust for Public Land right now are working with local folks and the supervisor of the town of New Paltz, for example. So we asked them, give us a letter asking for feasibility research. And that allows us to do certain thing, spend 501c3 money. We're not advocating for anything at this point. We'll put together a feasibility research memo. Of course, we have to have the money to pay for that, but it's not, you know, all that expensive. We look through local measures. We count the votes. You know, we figure out what has to be done locally. Should we pass that and the, you know, town board thinks it's worthwhile, we will commission a public opinion survey. We did one in New Paltz. You know, and Andy hit the high points. Really, water is what people care a lot about, recreation spaces and other things. And we do that. We also stress test it. We hit it with the tax message, and then we hit it with, you know, sort of what do people support overall. And then if you heard of that, it will raise transfer taxes, a one-time tax on, you know, the seller born by the seller of a house. You know, what's your view of that? Typically it goes down a little bit. And then, you know, if you were to hear that that money went for, you know, open space that you could use, what do you think? It goes up again. So we test these messages, you know, it's not guesswork. Then we make recommendations about the level. New Paltz is following Warwick at, you know, 1.5%, over 1,000. We'll work on the ballot language, and that ballot language is very important because that follows from the opinion survey. Go ahead, next. And then we run a campaign, as we're doing in New Paltz, and that, you know, it's old fashioned. You know, get the mailers out, get your message across. What are people voting for? It's, you know, educational more than anything else. And run a campaign. The only difference is you're voting for an idea or a concept or a specific tax measure and a conservation measure rather than a person. So, you know, there is a stepwise formula. There's a lot of off ramps here, but it can, you know, help you figure out. One of the important ones is the public opinion survey. Generally, these kind of measures poll very well in New York State and across the country. But if, you know, there are times when it's not polling well, and we'll advise, you know, not this year, don't do it. So, you know, you can take the temperature before, you know, you're fully committed to adopting and putting something on a ballot. Next slide, please. So anyways, I think we had our contact information at the end. There it is. You can also get it through, you know, Katie. So happy to answer any questions. I'll stay on a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I I want to thank everyone. We don't have too many questions. The one was significant one was about water, and I have to pull it up because it did come into my office today. I'm not, I hope, Colin, perhaps you could, since you said you were on the Water Quality Committee, and perhaps our new commissioner, Alan Sorensen, could think about this and we can get back to you. The question is about identification of aquifers and their sustainability, assuming development, and how to protect them, given New York has the classic common law water rights. How do we demarcate them, what their capacity is, what their recharge value is, given the increasing impervious surface? Specifically, he asked about the Moodna Basin, but we know that impervious surface is growing all over. Can anyone speak to that, or do you think we can research that and follow up? Colin, all speakers are unmuted, so feel free to jump on board.
I personally would need to do a little more research on that specific question. I do believe, you know, in terms of aquifer and wellhead protection, those are critically important issues. We can certainly work with communities, give them models for wellhead and aquifer protection programs. But the specific question I need to do a little more research into.
Understood. Assemblyman Schmidt, do you have anything to add?
No, I'd certainly be happy to work with whoever the questioner is, and we can certainly, you know, get them some more in-depth answers along with the commissioner, and, you know, make sure that we point them or the community in the right direction. And I thought, yep, you put it up there, so I certainly encourage if you can connect me with them or, you know, anyone. I know usually a lot of people don't like to ask questions, or it comes to them 2 hours later after they thought about what they would have asked. So please do reach out. Don't hesitate. I know I see several names on the on here who we've worked with, so they can tell you, do not hesitate.
Great. I appreciate that. And it's something that I think our office has been working towards. So we'll collaborate and we'll get that answer. As far as I don't see many other questions in the chat, I will encourage. Yep,
sorry, from
go ahead. Yes, please do.
From the Town Monroe would like to pursue a natural resource inventory open space plan. Does the county assist with the mapping, and is there funding available? With respect to the mapping, we can, funding, as you know, with COVID has many local governments with limited resources. But on the mapping side, the department has worked on a natural resource inventory. It is something that we've begun to focus on once again. And so I think with a little time, we can certainly help on a natural resource inventory mapping. But we got a few other projects in the hopper. So the answer is yes, it's just a matter of timing.
Right. There's also some valuable links, a good exchange of some information. So I encourage everyone to go to the chat box, please. Joe has asked everyone if Senator James Skoufis changed his view on the county-wide bill. I know he has been in opposition. I'm not sure if anyone can comment on that.
No.
I don't think we can speak to that. I see another question with respect to the, or maybe it's just a note to us that the DEC's estuary grants have included natural resource inventory, conservation financing, feasibility studies.
Right. That's
yeah,
Laura.
I mean,
go ahead.
Oh, go. So on a technical assistance part of it, the department, you know, maintains a library, if you will, of valuable resources. Many of the speakers here tonight have shared their agencies or organizations' expertise. There's a lot of valuable resources out there. We can certainly help steer you in the right direction. I think I just want to extend my sincere gratitude to Kate for organizing this, and to all the speakers who participated this evening. This is, you know, we have a unique opportunity in Orange County to preserve valuable open space, maintain the quality of our water resources, and had to shut off that phone. My phone is ringing, sorry about that. And protect farmland. You know, these are all things that over the long term are gonna help to maintain the high quality of life for the communities throughout Orange County. And I think, you know, just make the county an increasingly attractive place in which to live and raise a family. So we're committed, within the planning department, doing our part. Again, Kate, I think you put together a great panel, and thank you, and also extended thank you to your family, who also helped to get
My
this
support
together.
team.
Yes.
My support team, yes. And also the fun does not stop, folks. We hope to continue this effort in January. We'll talk about the new year. Hopefully Assemblyman Schmidt will come back again and we could talk about the act. But also a second night on maybe how to do a preservation plan. So please be on the lookout for that. Tell your friends, share my email. If anyone is interested in forming a Conservation Advisory Council or a climate smart community in their community, I would love to help you. If you have any questions, reach out to me about any of these things. And also, if you're interested in joining the Orange County Climate Smart Community Task Force, we have several groups studying water, education, agriculture, open space and land use, energy and transportation, and materials management. All the speaker contact information I will leave up if you need to grab a pen. And these are some valuable links to some of the information that's been discussed tonight. I will not close the meeting. I'll leave that up for a while. So you can write that down. I hope the chat room is also something I can record and post. And thank you to all of the presenters, and I hope to see you in January. Alan, do you have anything else to say?
No, I just, again, appreciate everyone for participating. Sincere gratitude to all the speakers this evening. And have a good evening to each of you, and stay well.
Good night, all.
Night.
Alan?
Kate, how are you?
Good. I'm going to power down. It seems we have Andrew and Donna and Meg. But I will, if you're good, I'm going to go tend to some good times.
Absolutely. Good, great presentation, Kate.
I'm sorry
thank you
we
for your
had those
family.
early glitches. Say thank you. Thank you. Yes, sorry.
You had a great support team there, so.
Very good support team. Okay, so I'm just gonna let it stay up here if people need, but I think that we're losing Andrew and Donna probably shortly, and we'll talk tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think at this point you can sign off and get back to your family. So have a good evening.
And start cleaning up after the dogs and a few other things. All
Okay.
right. Thank
Take
you
care,
so
Kate.
much, Alan. Have a good night.
Oh, you too. Take care. Yeah, bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.